Did you know that Tableau supports more than 10 different types of functions? And we are going to explore all of these types in series of videos. In today's video, we are going to learn about number functions, starting with what are number functions and why are they so important in Tableau, and how we can use them in Tableau. So without any further delays, let's get started. Welcome back, this is Gurpreet from DataViz Canvas, and in today's tutorial we are going to learn about number functions in Tableau. So number functions are really important, and before we learn about different type of number functions and how to use number functions in Tableau, let's get started by understanding what are number functions. So number functions basically are the calculations which allows us to perform calculations on the data values. Number functions can only be used with the fields that contains numerical values. So why is that? Because number functions are used as a calculation. So we create a calculated field where we can use these number functions to perform a computations on different values in the data fields. So how we can use them in Tableau? So we can use them in Tableau by creating a field where we can use one or multiple functions to perform computations in the calculations on data values. Now let's talk about different type of number functions. There are three types of number functions. That is mathematical functions, trigonometrical functions, and statistical functions. So let's go through each one of them in details, starting with mathematical functions. So there are a lot of mathematical functions used in Tableau. That is absolute functions, degree function, exponential, length, and so on. So let's go through each one of them in detail and understand how to use these one and what syntax we need to write and how we can use them to calculate the number functions. So let's get started by opening a blank Tableau workbook and connecting to sample superstore dataset. And before we jump straight into our mathematical function, first mathematical function, let's create a table with a category in the row shelf, and let's bring profit and sales values as well. So once we get that table created, we will create our first mathematical function, which is absolute function. So what is an absolute function? So absolute function returns the absolute value of a number. For example, if we have a negative value, as you can see in the profit section for bookcases, it's negative 3,473. And you can see for tables, we have negative 17,725. So basically we are losing, so we have a negative profit. And if we want to get an absolute value of these two, it will be 3,473 for bookcases and 70,725 for tables. So let's see how it works. Let's create a calculated field for absolute value, and we will create an absolute value function. We will simply type in ABS and press enter. And on the right hand side, you can see the help section of all these functions. So as we discussed before, it returns the absolute value for a given number. For negative 7, it returns 7. So here, what we will do sum of profit. And we will bring that value into here. And you can see here, where we have negative profit, the absolute value is 3,473. And same for tables, we have 17,000. So that's what absolute function is. Moving on to our next function is degree function. So what is a degree function? Well, degree functions convert the number or fields from radians to degrees. So let's see how it works. So for that, we will be using a degree function, and here you can use any number, or in some scenarios where we have angles and radians, we can convert them into degrees. So you can use any number. So let's say 60 degrees, 60 radians we want to convert into degrees. So we will simply press OK, and we will bring the degree, and it is 3438 degrees. And let's say if we want to convert value of pi into degrees, so what it will be? So it is 180 degree. So that's how a degree function works. Now let's move on to exponential function. So what is an exponential function? Well, exponential function, as it says, like it's the number e, where the number e is the base of a natural logarithm. So Tableau exponential function returns e raised to the power of the number, whichever we are using, whichever we are trying to use in our calculation. So let's see how it works. So we will simply see exponential here, and it will return e raised to the power of a given number. So here, for example, if we say exponential of 5, it will give us the value of e raised to the power of 5. So let's try that, what it returns. So we will simply click that, and you can see e to the power of 5 is 148. And you can change it to any number you want. Let's say we want exponential of 8, and it will give us 2981. So that's how exponential function work. Now moving on to our next function is ln function, logarithmic null function. So that function returns the natural log of a number, but if that number is less than or equal to 0, then it will return null. So let's see how it will work. So at the rate ln. So here, as you can see in the help section as well, so it returns null if the number is less than or equal to 0. So we can use any exponential function here, and we can say exponential of 8, and if we bring that value, you can see we are getting 8 value. And let's change this to, let's say 0.001, and you will see it returned us 0. But we can change our values whichever we want, and that way we will get the different values here. So in this case, the value is 0. So that's how logarithmic null function works. Now let's move on to the next function, which is log function. So log function is basically a function which returns the log of a number for a given base. If no base is provided, then it will use base 10 by default. So let's see how it works. So as you can see in the help section again, so it returns the logarithmic of a number to a given base. So for log 100, we get a value of 2. So let's try that example. So we will bring that log here. So log of 100 is 2. But now let's try to give the value of a base. So let's say I want log 100 to the base 10. And we will get value 2 here as well. Because by default, if we don't put any base, it will use 10 as a base by default. So let's change it to 5 then. So you will see the value change it to 3. So that's how log function works. And you guys might be wondering, like, these all things which we are doing now, these functions we studied in high school. Well, you guys are right, like these functions are exactly the same, and in this tutorial we are just revising, or you can say revising, the concept of how we can use those functions in Tableau. If you want to go into details of these theories and mathematical functions, I will share the link below in the description, and you can look into it for more further details. So let's move on to our next function, which is pi function. Pi function basically is a function that returns the numeric value or numeric constant of pi. So which is nothing but 3.14, right? So let's try what it returns if we just put that function pi, and we will bring that pi function, and you will see here it returns 3 because we are using 2 0 decimal places. So let's go into pi function here and go to format, and in the format we will change the number, customize the number, and increase the decimal places. So you can see here 3.1416. So that's how the pi function works. Now let's move on to our next function, which is a radians function. So what is radian function? It is similar to our degree function, where we are able to convert the number from degrees to radian, whereas in degree function we were converting number from radians to degree, right? So let's try the same thing here. We convert radian and we will, let's say, convert 180 degree into radian. So we will click OK and bring that here, and you can see the radian is 3. For 180 degree we got 3 radians. So that's how radian function work. Now let's move on to our next function, which is round function. So round function you might have used before. So round function helps us to round the number to the nearest integer or to a specific decimal place which we can provide in our function. So for this example, we can use 3.457273, and we want this to round it. So if we don't put any decimal point, so it will round this number, and let's see what it gives. So when we do that, it is giving us 3, because while rounding the 3.4, it rounds to the nearest decimal point. Now if I want to round it to 3 decimal places, let's see what it gives. It is still giving 3 because this number is not changing. So let's say, let me do this as 5 and this as 6. So let's see what it changed to. So when I did that, it rounded it to 4 because of these 3 values, where this number is 3.6, and when we round it to the nearest decimal place, a nearest integer, it will be 4. So that's how rounding function works. Now let's move on to the sign function. As the name suggests, the sign function returns the sign of the number. So for example, if we have a positive number, the function will return it as 1. And if we have 0, it will return as 0. And if we have negative value, it will return negative value. So we know that we have some of our profit values which were negative, right? So let's try that in this example. So we will type profit here. So sign of the profit value. So let's bring that here. And let me bring it here. So sign of profit value. So you can see here for bookcases, we have our negative profit, and the sign will give us the negative value. Whereas for chairs, we have positive profit. So it is returning the value 1. And if any of these have profit as 0, that means like no profit, no loss, then it will return it as a 0. But in this case, we don't have any such value, so we can't show it here. But if you have a data set where you have particular value 0, then when we want to get the sign of the 0, it will give us 0. So moving on to our next function is the square root function. So this one I definitely remember, we have used it a lot in our high school. So square root is nothing but it will give us the square root of a number. So let's try that. So we will simply type square root, and I want to know the square root of 81. So let's see what it gives us. So I will bring that here, and you can see here square root of 81 is 9. We can see it as simple as it is. So it's calculating it within Tableau itself. Now moving on to the next one is the square function. As we discussed about square root, the square function is similar, where it will return the square of a number. So when we do that and we put number 9 in this case, so as we know, the square of number 9 is 81. Square root of 81 is 9. So let's see when we do square of 9 what it gives us. So you can see here square of 9 is 81. We can see it here straight away. So that's how square function works. Now moving on to our next function is the floor function. That's quite an interesting function. So as the name suggests, floor is the bottom, like where we walk, right? So in the same way, in terms of integers, the floor function rounds the number to nearest integer of equal or lesser value. So let's see how it works. So if we type in floor and we want to get the integer value of equal or lesser value, so let's say 6.833. So what is the nearest integer value of equal or lesser value? So let's see what it is. And when I bring that here, you can see it here at 6. So when we edit it here, so 6.8. So the nearest integer value lesser than this number is 6. Same way, we have another function called ceiling function. So ceiling function, as the name suggests, it's return us the nearest integer which is of value equal to or greater than that number. So let's see how it works. So if we do 6.77867, so this should return us the nearest value which is greater than or equal to this number. So in this case, nearest integer value is 7. So let's see if it returns 7. So yes, you can see it here. It is returning the nearest integer value greater than that particular number, which is 7 in this case. Our last mathematical function is zero null function. So what does this function do? Well, this function evaluates the expression, and if it is null, then it will return a value of 0. Otherwise, it will return the expression as stated. So as you can see in this example, zero null or profit. So if there is any profit which is showing as null, then it will return as 0. Otherwise, it will give us the profit value. So let's take sales in this case. Sum of sales. So what it will do is, if we have any null sales, it will return it as 0. But in this case, we have all the sales as a particular number value. So it is returning us that number. So let's see if we have any null sales for manufacturers. In this case, so actually in this data set we don't have any such number. So you can see all of the zero null value is returning the actual sales value for that particular manufacturer and product. But if you have that data set where you have null values, then zero null function will return 0 if you have any null values. So that's all about the mathematical function. Let's move on to our next number function, that is trigonometrical function. Well, we have sine, cosine, tangent, cotangent, and so on, all the trigonometrical functions which we studied in our high school. Let's see how we can create a calculated fields for these trigonometrical functions in Tableau. So let's go back into our Tableau workbook, and let's use the same worksheet and with all our functions. And let me duplicate that sheet, and we say give the name to trigonometrical functions and mathematical functions for our previous one. So let's use our first trigonometrical function, which is sine function. And let me remove all of these values from here, leaving profit and sales. Apart from that, all of them we deleted. And I will show the values till subcategories. Okay, so let's get started with our first function, which is sine function. So sine function returns the sine of an angle, and we can specify the angle in radians. So let's see how it works. So we create a calculated field of sine function, and we can simply type in sine, and you can see it returns the sine of an angle and specify the angle in radians. So you can specify any angle. So you can say 3.14 as a sine of this angle, and we press OK. And when we bring it here, you can see it is giving us 0 because we have the value formatted to 0 decimal places. So let's change the number custom to 2 decimal places, and you can see it's still 0 because the sine of 3 is 0. So let's change it to 180 and see what it gives. So we are giving this value in radians. When we do that, you can see minus 0.80 is the sine value of this particular angle. Moving on to our next trigonometrical function is the cosine function, and it works the same way. So it will also return the cosine of an angle. Again, specify the angle in radians. So again, we will use 180 degree of cosine. And let's see what it returns. And it gives us -1. And we might need to change it back to 2 decimal places. So when we do that, you can see it's minus 0.60. And moving on to our next function is the tangent. And let's create a tangent function. And we will do again for 180 degree in radians for tangent. And we will bring it in and we will format it to 2 decimal places by simply going here, changing the number to 2 decimal places, and we can see the value of tangent is 1.34. So all these values for sine, cos, and tangent are different for a particular angle. So that's how we can use these functions to get the value, to return the value of these functions, trigonometrical functions. So our next trigonometrical function is cot. So let's create it here, and we can create cot of an angle. Again, we can use 180 degree in this case, and it will give us the value of cot. And in this case, we will change it to 2 decimal places, and you can see it's 0.75. Now we have 3 more trigonometrical functions, which are a sine, a cos, a tangent. And these are nothing but the version of sine. So as the name suggests, a sine. So a sine is a trigonometrical function which returns the arc sine. So a is representing an arc sine of a number, and the result is in radians. So let's say arc sine of, let's say 3 in this case. We do that and we bring it here is 0 or nothing. It's not coming anything. So if we change that value to 1, you will see arc sine of 1 is 2. So it's basically 1.57, but because we have rounded it to 0 decimal places, it's showing us this value. So let's change it to 2 decimal places and you can see that. And same way we will create another value of a cos. This is the value, this is the function which returns the arc cosine of a number. And again, the result is in radians. So we can use the number as shown in the example, and it will give us the arc cosine value with the 0 decimal places. You can again change and format the number to 2 decimal places and you can get that value. Now let's go to the third arc trigonometrical function is a tangent, which is again similar to a cosine and a sine. So a tangent returns the arc tangent of a number. So again, we can do, like, let's say in this case we do 120 and we bring that value and you can see it's 2. And when we do the formatting and bring the 2 decimal places, you can see the a tangent value is 1.56. So all these functions basically will be used if you have to use any of these trigonometrical functions for your visualization. So some of these functions I have used it in where I was using data densification technique to plot a chart over the circle, or where I'm using Sankey charts where I have used these trigonometrical functions. And these are quite useful and helpful when we are trying to create a curvatures, or even using some circular equations or quadratic equations. So I have used that in all those places. So you can check out my tutorial on Sankey chart or tutorial on other circular Sankey chart and those kind of charts where I have used data densification techniques, and you will be able to see all these trigonometrical functions the way I have used it there. Let's move on to our next number function, which is called statistical functions. Well, there are 2 types of statistical function. One is the max and the minimum. So as the name suggests, the maximum and the minimum functions are used respectively where we want to find the maximum value or the minimum value from the data values based on the number of rows, or the function will also return the value if we are comparing between two different arguments. So let's look into it how it works in Tableau. So let's open our Tableau workbook and let's go to statistical function, and we bring here again the categories and sales in this case. Or we actually bring just the sales function here, and you can see the maximum sale is 2297201. So that's our total sales value, right? And if I bring category, it's divided into different values. And if I split it into subcategories, we will see the values in the subcategories. So now I will create a maximum function, and I want to see the maximum value in these subcategories. So what I will do is I will simply bring max and I will say sales. So as the function suggests, it returns the maximum of all the single expression across all the records, right? So in this case, max of sales will return the maximum value of the sales under these categories. So in book case, the maximum sales value was 4,405, where the total sales were 114,000. And same way under chairs, furniture, and tables. And we will do the same thing for minimum function, where we will look for the minimum sales value for all these categories. So we will simply type in minimum, and we will find this minimum sales value by typing in sales and bringing it here. And you can see here, for book cases, the maximum sales value is $4,405, whereas the minimum value is $35. So that's how the statistical function works, and overall all these three different types, that is mathematical, trigonometrical, and statistical function, which comprises to make all the number functions. I hope you guys enjoyed this session, and we'll see you in the next session with our different Tableau function type. Till then, stay tuned and we'll catch you in our next session. Bye.